Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the AIA Exam Techniques webinar. My name is Christine Harbottle. Some of you may well have taken part in the last webinar we held in November before the November exams. But for those who have not taken part, I'd like to welcome you to this presentation. I plan to cover in the presentation information relating to the AIA exams, the syllabus, the use of command words, the application versus knowledge, information relating to our code of ethics, and how best to plan your answers in the exams. As you know, our exams are taking place next week, so we wish you every success in the exams. So first of all, I'll start with the first slides. There are 12 things that you need to know to improve your chances of passing the AIA exams. So I'll just give you a basic overview of the 12 things to start off. The AIA examiners who write the exam papers also mark the exams. So they are looking to see in your answers all of the workings to do with the questions that are being asked. So make sure in the exam script that you receive when you sit the exams that you write down all of the workings in the actual booklet, and if you have any separate sheets of paper, they're laid inside the exam script with your candidate number on and your student number, and the question in the exam paper the workings relate to, so the examiner can give you some marks for those workings. When you get the exam paper in front of you, you will see the front cover has the title of the exam paper, and then it has instructions in terms of how many questions you must answer. Those instructions are called the rubric to the paper, and you must make sure that you answer the correct number of questions. When we receive the exam scripts back and review the scripts, it's still clear that some students answer too few questions or not all of the parts to the questions. Please make sure that you review the question paper instructions and that you answer all of the questions required and all of the parts of the questions so that you can gain the maximum number of marks for that paper. If you neglect to answer a whole question in one of the sections, then the chances are you're going to fail that paper, because quite often there are a considerable number of marks awarded to the first questions in each section, and therefore it would be impossible for you to attain 50% in an exam if you miss out questions. In terms of time management, I will come on to time management later on in the presentation, but time management is key to you passing the exams. And I'm going to give you some tips from one of our examiner about how to present your answer and plan an answer, which we'll touch on shortly. You must make sure when you look at the syllabus, which is the guide to the paper, topic weightings and the content of the subjects, that you study all of the examinable topics. You should not just rely on answering one part of any topic and think that you're going to pass the paper. There is still evidence that some students are not covering all of the syllabus areas. Exam technique is an important area as well, and this is linked into time management, so that you must practice previous exam questions over and over again so that you understand how to answer a question and how to present things quickly in terms of the time that's available to you. The sixth point is independent reading. I read all of the markers' reports and study what the examiners have said in terms of how students have performed in the exams. And one of the key things is that the students don't do enough independent reading. So if you go to the syllabus and you go to the reading list at the end of the syllabus, you will see some recommended reading texts. The first text in the list is the AIA study text, which you get as an e-book. The remaining texts, and sometimes there are 2 or 3 books, which the examiner has recommended in terms of the information matching our syllabus, so you are advised to use those books as well. Many of them can be obtained directly from the links that are provided in the reading list to the publisher, so you should be able to get the books. I'm moving on to number 7 in the list of 12 things that you should know. And the 7th thing is that there are examinable standards in the exam papers, and each paper has certain standards in. whether they're international accounting or auditing standards. They're not in the law papers, they're not in the taxation papers, but they very often touch on the other papers. So you need to go to the grid, which is in the notes section of the syllabus, and you will see that there are different standards that are examined in that grid. You need to have a knowledge of those standards, and as you progress through the exam papers, you need to have a more in-depth knowledge of how to apply those standards. For those who are following the statutory audit qualification, and I know that some of us joining the conversation today are pursuing the statutory audit route, the examinable standards are also linked into those that are issued by the Financial Reporting Council. Now, that organisation is the regulator for the United Kingdom, and they have a website with their examinable auditing and financial accounting standards. So those of you who are doing the audit route, and then I can see somebody has joined us who is doing that route, you should be aware of those standards by accessing their website, and we have a link in the syllabus to the Financial Reporting Council. And moving on to the 9th point of the things that we should know, and this point relates to study skills. We recommend that you enhance your own study skills by referring to these resources, and in the exam advice we have issued particularly material which we think would help you, and I'm going to just mention those books now. I've read all of these books and I think they're pretty good, and they're easy to understand, and they provide some useful tips on how to reference material. The first book is called Cite Them Right. They're all published by Palgrave Macmillan, and they're listed in the Teaching and Learning Guide. Now, I think we have provided a link for that Teaching and Learning Guide, which you can find this reference material in. The second book is called Critical Thinking, and the third book is called The Study Skills Handbook, and the final book is called The Exam Skills Handbook. There's some very useful material in these books, and if you can, try and purchase one or two of them. They're not very expensive, but they will help you throughout all of the AIA exams. The final point that I wanted to say to you, I'm going back to the last final 2 points. The first one is review the syllabus. Make sure you understand exactly what's being examined. And also, in terms of ethics, which I'll touch on in a moment, you need to understand that the AIA adopted the IFAC Code of Ethics some years ago, and quite often examiners can ask you questions in exam papers where part of the question has an ethical dimension, so you should understand what the ethical standards are, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And then I'm going to give you the final last point, which is the 12th thing. You should be aware that plagiarism is a serious matter. So when you're producing information in your answer, if you've taken it from somewhere else and it's not your work, you do need to cite the information correctly and reference it in your answer. And that's where the study skills book, Cite It Right, gives some useful advice on how to do that. Okay, so let's touch on the information that maybe we can give you, which is additional to the time management, which I think the exam strategy. I'm going to explain a little bit of that to you. And as a follow-on to this, I can give you some articles to read, which we've produced last year, which I think many of you might have seen already, but I can reissue them to do with exam strategy. Quite often, students seem to struggle with narrative answers, but you do need to work out how to answer narrative parts of questions, and you can't ignore them. This means that you should regularly practice this type of answer. Many papers may require a mixture of narrative and calculation type questions, and you need to expect how to do that. In terms of time management, the papers vary in terms of the proportion of marks given for essay or discussion questions, and you need to look at past exam papers to work out what the balance is for that particular question. So, for example, on paper 13, which is Financial Accounting 3, 30% of the paper will require a narrative answer, and you can work this out in advance, and you have an expectation of how to produce your answer. When you start to answer the questions, so as soon as you've got your exam paper and you read the questions, you need to exercise some sort of self-control, some sort of self-discipline, so that you don't rush straight in to try and answer the question. You need time to think about what you're reading. Read the scenario over and over again and think about what that scenario is telling you in terms of the requirements to the question. It should not be possible to put your hand over the scenario to the question and answer the requirements. The requirements to any question are linked back to the scenario, and that is key to what you should do in your answer. The starting point to any answer should be you working out how many minutes you've got to answer each of the questions. So, for example, if the time available is 180 minutes, then the marks are 100 marks for an exam paper, then you would have approximately 1.8 minutes for every question, say for a 5-mark question. You can work this out in advance because most of the exam papers, the way the questions are set, are the same from one session to another. There are 4 steps that you should take when you're approaching your answer, in planning your answer. You should read the scenario slowly and carefully. Understand the heading, underneath your essay plan, you should put down a heading and then work out how you're going to attack this type of question, what ideas you've got. Read the question and the scenario again. Write down some ideas and link back your ideas to the scenario. Look at your plan and the number of issues in the order that you wish to write your answer. And then the 4th thing, begin writing your answer by discussing each point in turn so that you don't miss anything out in your answer. And so that the aim is to produce a structured approach to your answer, and this would demonstrate to the examiner that you've got the requisite skills to become a professional accountant, that you're able to produce a clear and concise answer, and that you understand what's required. There are 2 advantages of this particular strategy. When you're writing, you can concentrate solely on the issues that are at hand, and then your answer will also look concise and to the point. And hopefully you will gain the maximum number of marks. In terms of writing narrative answers, candidates often appear to have some difficulty in writing a good answer, and the only way that you can avoid this is by practicing the answers over and over again as part of your revision methods. And the final thing I suppose I want to say to you is, you must remember that knowledge on its own is not a sufficient thing for you to demonstrate you should pass the exam paper. You must be able to apply that knowledge to the scenario that's set in the paper. Now, in terms of application versus knowledge, AIA has divided the exam syllabuses into 3 levels. There's Foundation, Professional 1 and Professional 2. The Foundation level requires students to demonstrate 50% knowledge and 50% application in their answers. The Professional 1 requires you to demonstrate 75% and 25% knowledge, and then the final level is 90% application, so you can see that the final level exams are fairly demanding. In terms of comparing the exam standard with a UK degree, for example, the 1st and 2nd levels of our exams equate to a 1st-year degree, and the final level, which is the Professional 2 level, equates to a master's level degree. So once you get to that level, the questions are fairly challenging and demanding and require a very lengthy answer from you. It isn't sufficient just to produce several sentences and a few paragraphs and expect to gain maximum marks, especially where some of the questions at the final level require a case study of 40% of the marks. So they're looking for a lengthy answer from you. So that's touched on how to plan your answers. I'm going to move ahead now for a few minutes on the remainder of the information. In terms of past exam papers, you should use those as a tool to your revision. You can get the past exam papers by looking in the back of the AIA study text. The most recent study texts include questions from May and November 2013, and they also include sample questions throughout these study texts so you can see what sort of answers you should be producing. There isn't any sort of quick answer to revision. You should be spending a couple of hours every evening practicing exam questions, studying the material, working through a study plan that you've created for yourself, in terms of how you progress through the exams. And then certainly at weekends you need to dedicate more time to studying. And as you go through the levels of the exams, you need to spend more time. I'm moving on to the next slide now. In terms of the syllabus, you should refer to the syllabus before you progress onto your studies for the next exams. So what we tend to do with the exams, we issue a syllabus in October each year, and that syllabus is examined the following year. So the syllabus that we issued in October 2013 is examined in both exam sessions in May and November each year. And then in October 2014, we will issue the syllabus to be examined in 2015, and that's how we actually work any changes in the syllabus or any amendments to the information. And equally, the AIA study texts are updated every year and reviewed as part of the process by BPP, so they link into our syllabus and should cover the latest information for you. There is, if you look at the front of the syllabus in the notes section, a diagram showing you the interrelationship between the subjects. Some of the subjects, for example financial accounting 1, 2 and 3, have a direct link. So the knowledge you attain in paper 1 is then assumed knowledge for papers 2 and 3. Other papers, for example paper 5 auditing, the examiner for that paper assumes that you have covered the financial accounting paper 1 and the international accounting standards that are examined in paper 1, and you have a knowledge of those standards that you will bring to the auditing section of paper 5. So it's very important that you look at the interrelationship between subjects, because apart from going from levels, there is a relationship across some of the papers, and you will see in the actual syllabus that this is mentioned as well. In terms of the Code of Ethics, this is something new that I wanted to bring to this presentation today, and I did that because from reading the examiner feedback from the previous exam sessions, some of the examiners felt that students were not paying enough attention to ethical considerations. So I'm going to touch for a few minutes on the AIA Code of Ethics. A number of years ago, I think it was back in 2006, AIA adopted the IFAC Code of Ethics, which is for professional accountants. IFAC is the International Federation of Accountants, and we have agreed with that organisation that we can adopt their Code of Ethics. And if you wish to see this Code of Ethics, if you go onto the AIA website and look under the ethics section, you'll see a downloadable document which we require you as students to understand, to read and understand, because it could be that ethics could be examined in any question on the exam paper. There isn't a specific exam paper which solely centres on ethics, because ethics are implied throughout the syllabus. So you should expect maybe to have part of a question on ethics. Maybe there's something in the scenario which expects you to understand there's an ethical consideration there. The Code of Ethics is targeted at accountants, but it also is applicable to business managers. So depending on what role that you go into in the future, it will have a direct bearing on what you're able to do and advise you on how you should conduct yourself professionally. The International Ethics Standard Board create a Code of Ethics for professional accountants. And as part of those ethics, they have defined 5 fundamental principles, which is the ethical code. And I'm going to just mention those 5 principles to you, and then you should go to the Code of Ethics and understand exactly what they are. The first one is integrity. The second is objectivity. Then we move on to professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behaviour. These 5 fundamental principles should assist you in behaving ethically when you're working as an accountant. Quite often the circumstances in which professional accountants operate may create a specific threat to the compliance with these 5 fundamental principles. It's not possible for the International Ethics Standards Board to define every threat that you may face, but they do try and describe in the code areas that you may need to consider, and they have created a conceptual framework requiring accountants to identify and evaluate a particular threat, and then to address that threat in terms of how they comply with these principles. So that means that you would look at the situation, you identify and consider it, and then you look at the principles, and then you know how to proceed further. The approach assists accountants in complying with the ethical requirements of the code and meeting their responsibilities and requiring you to act in the public interest. So it is fairly serious in terms of your behaviour. The code states that accountants must display this integrity, and by that they mean that they should behave in an honest way in all business relationships, in their dealings with external partners, and then they should be objective, and this means that they should not allow any bias, conflict of interest, or undue influence of others to override their business judgments. So these are really important key things that you should consider, and that our examiners will expect you to understand and be able to explain and evaluate in the exam question. So I need you to go and look at this code really. I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about the exam papers again. There is a mixture of narrative and calculation questions, and you can see that from looking at the previous papers. We've touched on time management. You have 15 minutes when you get the exam paper to read the questions. Some papers there are no choices, so you've got to answer all the questions. So immediately you start reading the questions and planning how you might answer them in your head. Review the command words in the questions and understand and interpret what they actually mean to you. If you go to the teaching and learning guide, and you will see the command words across the different levels, and I'm just going to pick up my document now to refer to some of the command words. There are specific words across the different levels, and the examiners use these words so that you understand what's required in the questions. So for example, in the foundation level, the examiner can use the word define, and he's expecting you to state or explain clearly. Or he might ask you to prepare a particular report or some information. If you're preparing, you have to produce something that is clear and concise. Moving on to the professional 1 level, the words in the professional 1 level are different words which require different answers from you, so you need to go to the definitions for those words. Across all 3 levels there are 2 words, 2 command words, which are used across all 3 levels, and the 2 words are calculate and advise. The other words are different words, and you need to understand the definitions. So you need to look at these words in advance and understand what the examiner is requiring when you see these command words. We touched a little bit on planning your answers, and this is something that we want to see in your exam scripts. I'm just going to refresh you again with reading the scenarios. Make sure your answers are concise and to the point, but there need to be lengthy answers in terms of some of the higher level papers. Remember to attempt all questions in line with the rubric, which is the instructions on the front of the paper. The next question I wanted to ask you, and perhaps some of you might come back to me on this with your own questions, do you find the exam feedback guidance we issue after the exams useful? Do you read the AIA student focus information in the weekly news? And is anybody undertaking independent reading? And if you're not, why are you not doing it? Because it's really important. Moving on to the end of the presentation, just wanted to touch on a couple of points again. We intend to prepare these webinars before the exams in the future. So I know your exams are next week. We want to wish you good luck with those exams. If you need any documents after this presentation, please let us know and we can email those documents to you. If you've got any queries about the exams, we have a specific exams email address, and that address is exams@AIA Worldwide. Or if you want to telephone us and speak directly to somebody in membership services, you can do so. If you're dialing internationally, it's +44, then it's 191 493 0277. And we would be able to speak to you if you want to ring us up. Let's proceed with the questions now. Please type your questions to me and I'll move forward with any answers for you. The first question is, are we allowed to use scientific calculator downloaded from the smartphone during the exam? No. First of all, you can't take your phones or any electronic devices into the exams. So if you wish to use a calculator, it has to be an ordinary calculator, not one of those more advanced programmable calculators. We have very specific rules about electronic devices, so you can't take them into the exam. If you take them with you, then you are required to give your devices to the invigilator in the exam, and they will be stored away from your desk. Please do not, under any circumstances, take a mobile phone to your desk, because it could become an issue of malpractice, which would be a serious incident, and we don't want that to happen. The next question is where we can get past exams, and I think that you must mean past exam papers. You can get them directly from AIA. So if you email at that address, which is exams@aiaworldwide.com, we can give you those past exam papers. There is a fee for that. Or, as I've mentioned to you, the past exam papers are included in the AIA ebooks, so you should be able to see them there. The next question is allowed in points from the theory narrative questions. If you're answering the exam questions, you do need to produce full sentences, and if it's relevant to the question and the way the question's asked, you can include some bullet points, but I wouldn't include too many, because they don't really allow you to give a fuller explanation of your application of knowledge to the answer. So you can include some, but not too many. And somebody's asking me now, what is the passing mark? To pass the AIA exams, you have to achieve 50%. I'll just spend a few seconds explaining the marking procedure to you. Every exam script that we receive back from the exams goes through a quality assurance process. So we then send your script to be marked. When we get it back, we check the marks have been allocated properly and tallied up on the front of the script. If your script shows a mark of 45 to 49, it becomes a borderline script, and that's sent to a second marker who marks the script and checks the marks have been allocated correctly. We also take a random sample from the remaining scripts for that exam paper, and they are sent to another marker to review those scripts. So we've got quite a few number of steps to see. If you've achieved 50 marks, then you're awarded a pass. If you don't demonstrate that you are competent in the learning outcomes in the exam paper and get the 50% in the paper, you won't achieve a pass for that paper. And that's why I've said to you, it's really important to answer all questions and all parts of questions so that you can demonstrate your application of knowledge and that you warrant a pass. So you need to aim for 50%. The next question is, as a candidate for paper 7, which is the auditing paper, must I quote any section numbers besides giving explanations and answers to individual questions in the exam? I don't know what you mean about section numbers. As long as you answer the question which relates to the scenario, for example, if the question had parts A and B, in your answer, when you're planning your answer and writing it on the script, if you just put the question number and the part A, and then you answer that underneath that part A, then the examiner will see which question, which part you're answering. So that shouldn't be a problem. The next question is, for those calculations, it is marked step by step, or if the result wrong, the marks will be lost for the whole question. If you're answering a calculation question and you're demonstrating in your workings that parts of the workings are correct, then the examiner will give you a mark for the parts that are right. If you get to the final part of the answer and the final figure is incorrect, providing the parts above the workings that you're showing are correct, the examiner will give you marks for anything that's correct. We don't do negative marking, so you wouldn't be penalised because the final part was wrong. If the parts above in the workings are correct, you will get the marks that are correct in your answer. Now moving on to a question about, can AIA provide us some useful exam feedback specifically regarding individual exam results? No, we can't. We can't give individual marks, and nor can we give each candidate specific exam feedback, because that would be quite a task to do. But what we do undertake is to review all of the exams and the performance of students in the exams and the feedback from the examiners, and then we produce this in the exam advice in terms of how people have performed, and that's how we give back feedback to students. And of course you can get feedback on the AIA Achieve course. So those of you who are not registered on an approved study provider course, what I would most strongly recommend is that you register on the AIA Achieve course, because as part of the course you get feedback on exam questions, you're given specific advice from e-tutors, you can do mock exams, and you can get assistance with advice generally. So if you feel that you're struggling because you're independently studying on your own, why not register on AIA Achieve, and then you would get some assistance from AIA. And we can provide information about that course, and in fact now is the time to register for your studies with AIA Achieve for the November exams and moving forward. So it would be a good point to think about whether or not you want to do that, and we can provide a link to the person who can give you the advice. And the next question is, what's the passing rate of the last 4 exams? In terms of people achieving a pass, it varies in the last 4 exams. For example, performance in the financial management paper, which is paper 14, students achieved quite a good success rate in that exam, whereas the financial accounting paper and the professional practice paper, which is paper 15, students seem to struggle with the narrative parts of those papers, and they don't produce a lengthy enough answer to warrant a pass. So the way that people pass in different papers varies depending on the paper. The next question I'm receiving here is, why are candidates not provided with marks obtained in exams? AIA has basically taken the decision to issue to students advice in terms of whether or not they have a pass or a fail. So if you achieve a fail, then you know that you haven't achieved 50% and you have not passed the exam. It is the case that students can appeal the marks, and if you feel that you have achieved perhaps or you expect to achieve a pass and you're a bit disappointed, then every student has the right to appeal, and at that stage we usually email you and let you know if you have come close to the pass or not. Quite often students think they've done really well and they've achieved less than 20 marks in the exam paper, for example. So your expectation and the actual performance in the exam can sometimes differ. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you would know yourself. For example, if you went on to AIA Achieve and as part of the course you take part in a mock exam, we do give feedback on that mock exam, and that would give you an indication if you were close to achieving a pass or not. And that would be a good way for you to measure yourself if you had enough knowledge in the subject to be able to get a pass, or whether or not you needed to study more. So what I would recommend is that you actually do that. Another question, when calculating goodwill, do we still need to use new layout or old layout to get the point? You need to use any current requirements in terms of the International Financial Reporting Standards and how the reports should be presented. So you do need to go to the particular standard to understand how to do that. Now, if you're doing paper 13, which is Financial Accounting 3, you need to go to the ebook, and all of the information in terms of how you should present goodwill is included in that text. So go to the text and use the new layout and the new terminology to make sure that you are using the correct information. And I mean, the study texts, as I mentioned at the very beginning, are up to date in terms of the International Accounting and Auditing Standards and how to present the information. So if you use those textbooks, they're going to help you to actually make sure what you reproduce in your answer is the correct way to produce a report. So at the end of this presentation, what we'll do, if you need anything, you can email me directly on exams@aiaworldwide.com. If you need further information or any documents, we'd be happy to give you those. As I mentioned, the exams take place next week around the world. Make sure you take your exam notification form with you, and also some means of identifying who you are, which can include a passport or a driving license, or if you're in Hong Kong, for example, I think you have your own ID cards in that country. It's very important that you're able to identify who you are, so that the venue providers that we have instructed to conduct the exams can match up your name with the details on the register that we have given them. The exams commence at different time zones around the world, so make sure that you turn up on time. You need to be there 30 minutes before the exam commences, so that you can enter the room, sit down and commence on time. The first 15 minutes of the exam are a reading period. You can't write in the script, but you can read the questions and think about your answers. During the 3-hour exam period, you should continue to answer all questions. Please use the time wisely. Don't try and finish as quickly as possible. Work out how many minutes you want to allocate to each question. Answer all questions and all parts of questions. And then if you've got some time at the end, go through your answers and make some adjustments if you need to. 30 minutes prior to the end of the exam, the invigilator will announce that you've got 30 minutes left. And then 5 minutes before the end of the exam, the invigilator will announce you've got 5 minutes left. He will then say, stop writing. You will put down your pen and leave the script on the exam table along with the exam paper. They are then gathered in and returned to the AIA as quickly as possible. And when we then start the marking process, ready to issue you the results in July. I've got 2 last questions. Somebody's asking, can I recommend how many years past papers to prepare for the exam? Really, I wouldn't recommend that you go beyond sort of 2 or 3 years, because the standards and the syllabus may have changed, and therefore you should be looking at the most current and recent exam papers. The next question is, how often will the books be updated? So the AIA books are updated every year. That's our study texts, our e-books. The recommended reading texts that we have in the syllabus ask examiners to recommend the most recent texts to us, and then we update the syllabus. If you want to make sure you've got the most recent textbook, which is recommended on the list, go to the publisher's website and make sure when you're buying it, it is the most recent version of that text. We do say that in the introduction to the syllabus, that you are required to make sure you buy the most recent texts. The AIA textbook that we give you for your £10 fee is the most recent book, but the other texts in the recommended list should be the ones that the publisher have on their website, so make sure you check that. And the final question is November 2013 exam paper and resolution available? I think you mean solution. They are available for a small fee. So if you wanted to receive those, you would have to email exams@aiaworldwide.com. We've already released the variant exam papers, but the November ones we have just recently made available. So if you want those papers, you would have to email exams@aiaworldwide.com. And they're also available as part of the AIA Achieve course for those students who wish to register on that particular course. I hope that's answered all of your questions. I'll tell you my name again. It's Christine Harbottle, and I'm the Manager for Membership Services. If you need any help in the future, you can contact me through the exams email address, or as I said, you can telephone the office if you need any specific help. We're here to help you. Thank you for attending.